Okay, Mike T, you said let's light this, so let's get started. Wendy, it is great to see you, by the way. I enjoy getting your greetings every morning, so it's great to see you. We've got a lot to talk about today. Hopefully, we'll have some more people join us here. Um, we I was just reading about what's going on in Ukraine. It's really remarkable there. On the one hand, you've got the Ukrainian army has made remarkable progress in taking back territory from the Russians, both in the northeast and the south of the country. But at the same time, you've got the Russians who are essentially annexing certain parts of the country, even parts that they don't have control of, and potentially threatening to use nuclear weapons to defend them. So that's obviously big news. Another piece of big news, obviously, is we've got the OPEC Plus just today announced that they're going to potentially increase the prices of oil by decreasing their production. The question is the White House going to be able to convince maybe Venezuela or Iran or some other countries to maybe pump some more oil that will help keep the price of oil down? Or is the United States going to take other steps to try to separate us and stop our dependence upon OPEC? Yep, always good to see you, Wendy. Then here in the United States, obviously, we've got our midterm elections coming up. Kind of a scary thing for me. Yes, we will talk a little bit about Italy. Let me just talk about the American upcoming midterm election, and then we'll talk about Italy. The midterm election, I had been feeling pretty good about things leading up to the midterms. But now it seems most of the polls seem to be shifting a little bit back toward the Republicans, which is a little bit nerve-wracking. Last I saw is most of the averages, which had actually been saying that the ballot was leaning more Democratic. You know, what we call gosh, I'm blanking on the word. The standard ballot, basically. Was leaning toward the Democrats. Now it seems to be leaning slightly toward the Republicans, which is a little disturbing. But then we have what's going on in Georgia. Well, I'm hoping, Wendy, I'm hoping it's close. I have to say, one of the amazing things about gerrymandering is that most of the research seems to indicate that where we expected the Republicans were going to make huge gains. And really, when you look at it on a case-by-case basis, it seems like the Republicans really have abused their authority in places where they have certain authority. The reality is that most of the assessments overall show that it's relatively that the partisan lean of the congressional district, of the average congressional district now, is only about 1% Republican, which is a lot less than it has been in the past. So certainly we've got a shot at it. And the best thing that the Democrats have going for us, frankly, is both the quality of our candidates and the poor quality of the Republican candidates. And again, we just saw that with what's going on in Georgia with Herschel Walker, who I almost feel bad beating up on him, but it's like this guy, he even his son was beating up on him. Based upon the latest revelation about his having paid for an abortion for an ex-girlfriend, which just shows the level of hypocrisy. But what really shows the level of hypocrisy is how a lot of Republicans have leapt to his defense anyway. It doesn't matter. Character does not matter to Republicans anymore. So, yes, and in Kansas, that really seems to indicate that hopefully, hopefully, we're going to see big turnout from women, but in general, pro-choice supporters who are going to say that we need to do something on abortion, and hopefully that's going to kind of change turnout. Because you have to remember, the polls leading up in Kansas did not indicate that it was going to be the kind of blowout that it turned into. Susan, glad to see that. I'm with you. In terms of never voting Republican. I have to admit, actually, once I did vote Republican. And I can say, though, now that was a long time ago when things were different, and things have certainly changed now. I never will again, at least certainly not in the foreseeable future. But we do have a request about talking about Italy. Big goings on there, obviously. Italy has elected essentially a fascist as the new prime minister. Good for you, Wendy. You're obviously more on target than I am. So the scary thing about what's going on, though, is you almost feel like we're living in this world where everything's going crazy sometimes. You know, you have Vladimir Putin obviously invading Ukraine, and he gave this unhinged speech, which I think tomorrow I'll have a video that I react to. So hopefully you guys will be able to check that out. It's kind of a long video, but I felt like we needed to really cover this speech because it is so crazy, and just shows how he's got this warped view of the world where literally might makes right as far as Putin is concerned. And if he's able to go and take something, it doesn't matter how the people feel about it because he wants it, he can take it. And that's pretty much the message that he's sending. So that seems to be the attitude, though, among a lot of these right-wing dictator types. It's certainly the attitude that we see in Donald Trump, who I consider kind of in that same vein, that same group of these right-wingers who, if they're not dictators, certainly want to be. You've, of course, got Orban in Hungary, who has been kind of put in an odd situation. Same thing with in Turkey. They've kind of been put in an odd situation because with the invasion of Ukraine, they had really been leaning, kind of to try to develop closer relationships with Russia. But then with the invasion, that changed everything. So now they're finding themselves on the side, really kind of doubling down on their NATO membership and really moving away from the relationship that they had with Russia. So shows that Putin has really done a lot of damage to him. One interesting thing to note, though, about what's going on in Italy is that it is not a strong executive country the way we have here in the United States. It's what's considered a parliamentary democracy. So what that means is that unlike here in the United States, where the president has really enormous amounts of power, the prime minister governs through a coalition. Yes, we'll talk about that too, Wendy. The prime minister governs through a coalition. I believe, as I saw that her coalition got 36% of the vote or so. So nowhere near a majority. It's not any kind of real mandate or anything. She is certainly going to be able to establish a government, but it's going to be what's called a minority government, which means she's going to have relatively little power. And so hopefully she won't be able to do the kind of damage that, say, Donald Trump has done here in the United States. What's more is that she actually had expressed solidarity with Ukrainians. So she's not kind of one of these Putin lover wannabes the way Donald Trump or Viktor Orban are. So hopefully things won't be as bad there as we're feared. But it is scary to think that Italy, the home of Mussolini, it has elected a new fascist. I mean, goes to show you how crazy things have come. Hey, Dennis. So Wendy, yes, you're right. DOJ. Actually, I have to say, I've been really impressed with how aggressive the Department of Justice has been recently going after Donald Trump. I mean, the way that they kind of countered the defense that his lawyers raised to this whole search of Mar-a-Lago was really very impressive. When they kind of went to town and just fought in the public eye, and they released the affidavit, which showed that they had. It does feel like it took them long enough, But the thing, I'll tell you, I was really concerned about Merrick Garland when I first heard that he was going to be appointed Attorney General, because of the fact that it sure does, because of the fact that he is cautious. That's part of the reason, actually, that Obama wanted to appoint him to the Supreme Court. Obama thought that by appointing somebody like Merrick Garland, who is very moderate and very cautious and kind of well-liked by people on both sides of the aisle, that he'd be able to get the votes together that were sufficient to get him appointed to the court. Well, obviously, he didn't take into consideration the level of partisanship and the kind of dirty pool that Mitch McConnell was going to play. But that being said, it just shows that Merrick Garland is really kind of a moderate, very cautious type. And I remember when I raised this issue with some friends of mine that I was concerned about him as Attorney General, that I would have liked to see someone a little more aggressive. They pointed out the fact that this is the guy who had prosecuted the Unabomber, who had prosecuted Timothy McVeigh. So he is not some lightweight. He's very careful. but he's also an aggressive prosecutor. And I think that we're seeing that here with what's going on in Mar-a-Lago, where he took his time. You're right about that. It did seem like they were holding back for a long time, and I was getting frustrated, I got to tell you. But what is clear is that he made sure all their ducks in a row, and that's what we're seeing now with the way things have been handled with the search of Mar-a-Lago. I mean, can you imagine if there were the slightest kind of gap in the credibility that the Department of Justice had in terms of being able to do this search? How Fox News and all the rest would have just jumped all over that, but they weren't able to because of the fact that he had been so careful. Um, uh, yes, I agree with her. Yeah, Mike. Yeah, we'll have to see how things go. Again, in a parliamentary democracy, it's a little different than it is here, where we have that kind of winner takes all system. And hopefully that'll kind of keep her a little bit in check. Hopefully, also, again, she isn't really a Putin lover, the way that we have seen with some of these other kind of authoritarian wannabes like Donald Trump. And as a result, hopefully she will, stay kind of in the mainstream. I'm just blanking out right now. Actually, Mike, you probably remember that the name of the prime minister in Italy, who was also the owner of all those media outlets there. I'm blanking out on his name for a second here. He's an example of somebody who actually, in some respects, did more damage, but that's because of the fact that he did control these other media sources. Interestingly enough, I believe he was charged with corruption and ended up being convicted. So kind of interesting to see what's going on in Italy. But Mike, if you can remember the name of that prime minister for me, yeah. We'll have to look it up here in a sec. But he probably, but in this case, the new prime minister doesn't have any kind of influence over the media the way that he did. So, yes, I think you're right about that, Wally. And Wendy, I totally agree with you. I think Putin thought that he was going to walk in there. This is a great example of the problem that authoritarian governments have. They don't have people who can walk in there and say, hey, President Putin, that's a bad idea. The Ukrainians probably aren't going to be welcoming us into their country with open arms. It might not necessarily work out as well as you think it's going to be. And he doesn't want to hear bad news. How would you like to be the general walking into Vladimir Putin's office and saying, hey, Vladimir Putin, we just lost a whole division, that was basically encircled by the Ukrainian military. So as a result, he really doesn't have access to kind of the broad scale of information that more democratic leaders would have, where he can kind of assess different sources of information. So as a result, I agree with you. I think that he was kind of bought into his own PR. He was blinded by his own ideology. And Berlusconi, thank you, horse rider. Yes, he was the former PM in Italy. But at any rate, so they don't have the broad area of information. And what's interesting to me is, just kind of as an aside here, you had, of course, Donald Trump, who wanted to be like that. He didn't want to be exposed to the broad information. He didn't want to hear the things that he didn't like. Part of being a leader sometimes is you have to listen to information you don't like and then kind of figure out where you're going to go from there. So, yeah, I agree with you, Dennis. But it's not just a matter of partisanship, and it's not just a matter of public perception. What it is it's a matter of making sure that your case is airtight. I got to tell you, when I was practicing law, that was one of my weaknesses. I always had to have another attorney kind of be there to help punch holes in my case, to remind me, oh, here's a weakness that you need to address as you're putting together a case. And I got to tell you, I think that this is something that Garland is very good at, is making sure that all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed, and as a result, the case is unassailable in the courts. And you saw that, by the way, with the response of the 11th Circuit on the appeal. That that Florida judge, God, she's just ridiculous. I can't believe what a sellout she is to Donald Trump. But in the 11th Circuit, you have to remember, 2 of the 3 judges who voted to overturn her ruling were Trump appointees. So just because someone's a Trump appointee doesn't mean that they are necessarily, yes, she is definitely corrupt. Eileen Campbell, right? Um, and and anyway, so just because of the fact that they are Trump appointees, most judges are going to take their oath very seriously. Eileen Cannon, thank you very much. Sorry about that. I think it was interesting to show that they just completely dismissed her arguments when it got to the 11th Circuit. And I would not be surprised. Of course, we have Donald Trump has asked to take this now to the U.S. Supreme Court. And I would not be surprised if we see the U.S. Supreme Court simply decline to hear the case. Because you have to remember, the Supreme Court has to agree to hear cases. They have to do what's called granting cert. And if they don't do that, then the ruling of the Court of Appeals stands. And so in that case, the ruling of the 11th Circuit would stand. All right. Yeah, well, I mean, Clarence Thomas, there's a whole other, I'll tell you an interesting story. I actually worked in Washington when Clarence Thomas was first appointed to the court. And I remember that whole situation. And it was so frustrating to watch. And I got to tell you, Biden was one of the people I was frustrated with at the time. He was the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee at the time. And he was trying to essentially get along with Republicans, that same thing that Biden always kind of has an issue with. And yeah, Anita Hill, I was actually there in Washington when she testified, working on Capitol Hill. And I remember her testimony clear as day. And I remember then seeing the response by Clarence Thomas when he went on and testified and talked about the high-tech lynching that he was going through. And I felt it was crazy that we had to explain to people, wait a minute, you don't have a right to be on the U.S. Supreme Court. Being on the U.S. Supreme Court is a privilege. You should be absolutely unassailable if you're going to be appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court. And then here we are. We found ourselves in the same situation with Kavanaugh, who, whatever you say about Gorsuch, and I'm no fan of Gorsuch's, don't get me wrong. But I've read some of his earlier decisions when he was a circuit court judge. I mean, he's a real judge. He's a real justice. And we have to remember, too, there was also a case involving the state of Oklahoma and certain Native American lands where he ruled against the Trump administration. So even though I disagree with him vehemently, he actually, at least arguably, has a place on the court. Kavanaugh, though, this is, it's unbelievable to me that we basically have 3 justices on the U.S. Supreme Court right now who have been credibly accused of sexual harassment. And these are the people who are going to be ruling on issues involving abortion and involving, and not surprisingly, they make up 3 of the votes in the Hobbs case that overturned Roe v. Wade. So coming back to if TFG, are you? Okay, got it. Sorry, Katrina. It took me a second there. No, they are separately appointed at this point. Literally, the Senate would have to impeach each of them if they wanted to remove them. Arguably, there's a case to impeach, or actually be the House impeached, and then the Senate would try the impeachment. Arguably, there's a case to impeach Kavanaugh, given the fact that it's probably clear that he lied on the stand, and that the Department of Justice and the FBI didn't fully investigate him. But what we've seen is the fact that he is that at this point it's basically become a political maneuver, and until we have 2/3 of the vote in the Senate, you're never actually going to remove anybody from office. But I agree, in terms of credibility, huge problems. Barrett, the problem with Barrett, of course, is I mean, aside from the fact that she's way right wing, belongs to essentially a religious cult that believes something akin to like what we see on Handmaid's Tale. Um, of course, is the fact that she basically was confirmed by the Senate just days before the election, after the Republicans had taken this principled stand against considering Merrick Garland's nomination a year before the election. I mean, it just shows the hypocrisy of this group. So um, it is what it is. I mean, in terms of credibility, they've lost it. I do think there should be term limits. That would kind of dial down the level of partisanship that goes into the court. Maybe we could actually get back to an era where appointments to the court are based upon who is um, a credible justice, someone who's really a respected jurist. Because of the fact, if we did that, then each president would have a certain number of justices that they could appoint, and we wouldn't go through this craziness like we've gone through here, where the Republicans win what, two of the last X number of elections, and that they've appointed the supermajority of the Supreme Court. It just is completely unacceptable. So I think that something has to be done. I would probably prefer term limits, frankly, to a retirement age. And you're right, Mike. They really did cheat on that one. Yes, Dr. Oz. Thank you for bringing him up, Wendy. One of my favorite topics, I have to say. And actually, as crazy as he is, the thing that I really like about that race is his opponent. I think that his opponent, and gosh, you see, I'm terrible with names. I'm just blanking out on his name right now. Somebody help me out with that one. Yeah, the Federalist Society, they basically bought and set up this court exactly how they wanted it. Yeah, Fetterman, thank you. Exactly right. I am a huge fan of his. I've been a huge fan of his since I first saw him in the primaries. In fact, I donated to his campaign during the primaries. I think he's dynamite. I think he's exactly the direction the Democratic Party needs to be going. He's somebody who is unapologetically liberal. He is somebody who stands up for unions and stands up for fairness. And the reality is, when you look at the issues, issue by issue, especially in terms of, say, for example, unions, choice, in terms of legalizing marijuana, in terms of gay marriage, in terms of higher taxes on the rich. We dominate on those issues. And the only reason that we aren't winning overwhelmingly is because we get sidetracked off into these other issues that a lot of the time aren't even reality. Like we've heard so much about the border crisis. Just today I saw something. Gosh. Oh, you voted for him? Are you in Pennsylvania, Wendy? Okay, yeah. Oh boy, I tell you, if I lived in Pennsylvania, I would have voted for him. Here in Michigan, of course, I'm a huge fan of Gretchen Whitmer, who's our governor, who's that woman from Michigan, as we may recall, who kind of stood up to Donald Trump. Huge fan of hers. And of course, in the administration here, I actually know Jennifer Granholm back from my days when I used to work in government. And she, of course, is the Secretary of Energy now. Yes, I'm with you. Gretchen is fantastic. And this whole border thing, I mean, it is just absurd. I hope all of you had seen the video I did a little while ago, where I watched this video that was posted on Fox News, where they're saying, "Oh, look, here's video of immigrants sneaking across the border." It was the fakest video I've ever seen. It was absolutely ridiculous. And how anybody could watch that and not think that they just are completely making up everything, I don't know. Hey, asexual atheist, thank you so much for your contribution. Oh, and I think that there was another up here. I just want to make sure. Easy Dash Target, thank you so much. I really appreciate your support, both of you. And actually, let me just take a little break here for 1 second. I do also want to thank my Patreon supporters. They are Michael, Thomas, Patrick, Bradley, and James. I don't want to use their last names because I don't know if they want to be completely exposed here. But I want to thank them for their support. I also want to thank my channel members here. I actually tried to figure out who my channel members are. I got a few of them, and I couldn't figure. It wouldn't tell me who it was through YouTube. But I want to thank them as well. And you have to know, just as an aside here, every dollar I get from this channel goes straight back into the channel. I don't take any of it. I do this much to the consternation of my wife, as a volunteer activity because I enjoy it and I care about it and believe in it. And my goal is just to get the word out to everybody. So hopefully we can help spread the good word and help folks who are in some of the tough states stand up to the craziness of the MAGA crowd. So let's keep talking here. What else do you guys want to talk about? What do you think about Georgia? Do you think that the latest the latest allegations, the latest revelations that have been brought out against Herschel Walker are going to hurt him? Absolutely, great to have you here, TMB. What do you think? So is Herschel Walker going to be hurt by these latest revelations? His son, Christian, who had been very supportive of his campaign and who is a right-wing Christian conservative, to be clear, pro-life, right-wing conservative. He went berserk in a video attacking his father, and up until now, he's been very supportive of his father's campaign. So I think it really shows the level of hostility it's created. But the problem is, again, it's like they don't care. It's like if you are part of the MAGA crowd, they don't care. They're going to do whatever it takes to get you elected. They don't care who you are, what kind of a quality person you are. And to me, it's such an outrage. I mean, here they are running against the former pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church. I mean, where Martin Luther King preached. And they are... and they're trying to defeat him with Herschel Walker, who every day it seems there's something new about him. Yeah, I mean, he wasn't even living in Georgia at the time. He was in Texas. I just see your comment, Dennis. He was in Texas, and he literally moved to Georgia simply because he would run. So because he was recruited by Donald Trump. Ironically, Mitch McConnell initially was not in favor of him running because he knew the kind of baggage that he would bring to the race. And he knew that Georgia was a potential pickup for the Republicans. And that's where I come back to the whole issue of the House and the Senate. Yes, from a structural basis, the Republicans have an advantage, no doubt. Also, given the fact that it's an off-year election, we're the party in power, that hurts us as well. But between two things, number one being the abortion issue, and we saw how that impacted things in Kansas, and number two being the fact that the Republicans are just so crazy, and Donald Trump is out there riling things up and just repeatedly showing how crazy they are, and that they have candidates like Mastriano in Pennsylvania, and Oz in Pennsylvania, and Walker in Georgia. And gosh, I'm trying to remember the name of the person out in Arizona who's running for governor. I mean, she's as crazy as they come. Somebody help me out with that one. Yeah, I mean, Rubio, this is the scary thing about Rubio. Who else here remembers the 2016 election when there was that debate where Rubio got into it with Donald Trump? And it was like personal attacks, at a very low level, where Rubio really kind of thought, hey, I'm going to, there you are, Wendy, you see, he really thought, I'm going to go and get into the gutter with Donald Trump and take him on where he is. Yes, exactly. And Donald, you aren't going to win a battle fighting with Donald Trump in the gutter among the MAGA crowds. There's just no winning there. So rather than showing that he's a person of principle, the way that say Kinzinger, for example, did, he decided that he was going to just kind of become this complete sycophant to Donald Trump. Same thing with with Texas. Gosh, you'll have to forgive me. I'm terrible with names. The senator there, help me out with him. Um, the one who nobody likes. Cruz, thank you, Ted Cruz. Yes, exactly. You see, we're all a team here working together. Um, yeah, Ted Cruz. I mean, who else remembers? He wouldn't even endorse Donald Trump after the primaries in 2016 because he said that he is not a faithful person. He's not somebody who is credible. Blah blah blah. All that stuff. Here he is defending him and saying that they shouldn't have searched Mar-a-Lago for top secret documents. I mean, what kind of craziness is that? Um, but I totally agree. I saw somebody up here talking about Boebert. Oh yes, asexual atheist. Yes, thank you. Boy, I'll tell you, she is really something, isn't she? I'll tell you something. I'll call you AA. Do you live in Colorado? Yeah, exactly, TMB. Yeah, they're completely spineless. Exactly right, Mike. Um, okay, yes. I actually used to live in Colorado myself. I lived in Fort Collins. I worked on a campaign for Congress. You may remember it if you've been there for a little while. The name of the candidate was Tom Redder, and he was running for Congress against, gosh, he was an incumbent Republican in the Eastern Plains district there. I think it was the fourth district. And we ran a great campaign, had a lot of fun. Unfortunately, we came up short, but love Colorado. But they definitely have kind of their own philosophy out there, right? I'll tell you after that campaign. Oh, you're in Fort Collins. Oh my goodness. Um, uh, yeah. Do you remember the Redder campaign? It would have been in 1992, the year that Bill Clinton was elected president, actually. Okay. Yeah, it was a long time ago. Long time ago. And we didn't win. So, it's kind of one of those things that's a footnote in history. Um, but um, yeah. Hey, HX, welcome. Another Michiganian here, right? Glad to have you here. Um, oh wow, we've got a bunch of connections to Fort Collins. But anyway, I remember coming back from that election, and I had a friend who was from Alabama. And you have to remember, this is back in the era where the Democrats were still kind of thinking, oh, yeah, I'm with you, TMB. That this was still the era where the Democrats would be able to win the South. We remembered still the solid South. There was still a pretty hefty contingent in Congress from the South among Democrats. And so as a result of that, he was arguing that the Democrats need to focus on getting Southern candidates. And look, Bill Clinton had been elected and he was from the South. And he had his running mate, Al Gore, who was from the South. And the argument that I made is no. The future of the Democratic Party is the West. It's Colorado. It's New Mexico. It's Arizona. It's Nevada. And you have to remember, at that time, these were all Republican states. And he argued with me, and I have to say, I think that my predictions have come true. The West is much more of an area, I think, where people tend to be forward looking. And the more that you kind of states become more forward looking, the better Democrats do. I mean, look at Virginia. I remember when Virginia was a Republican state. Well, Virginia, because of the large population, especially in suburban DC there in Northern Virginia, has become basically a Democratic state at this point. Then you have Georgia because of the growth around Atlanta, very much forward looking. As a result of that, you see where Georgia is becoming more Democratic. Hopefully, we're going to see some progress in Texas. And I saw somebody asked about Abbott, so we're going to talk about that here in a second. Oh yeah, Wendy, you asked about Abbott, and 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 the growth there, though, has been in Houston and Dallas, in the Dallas area. And those areas now have become largely Democratic. So again, they're forward looking. And as those places become kind of forward looking, then you're going to see them become more Democratic. Um, well, they always want to flip Colorado. And Allie, I see what you're saying about oh, you live in Colorado now too. Um, you know, the MAGA movement, Michigan is a swing state. Michigan's been a swing state for a long time. Um, you know, the problem that we have is that, yes, exactly. The big cities are usually blue. The big change has really been the suburbs, which increasingly have been becoming Democratic over the past few years. And at any rate, so the in terms of the MAGA movement taking hold, the fact that Michigan is a swing state simply mean, and the Republican Party has basically become dominated by MAGA, simply means that you're going to have that contingent being a major player here in the Republican Party in Michigan. Ironically, Betsy DeVos, who of course is a huge kind of force here in Michigan, even though she was a cabinet member in the Trump administration, she was Secretary of Education, as we all remember, possibly the worst Secretary of Education in history, but that's another a story for another day. But Betsy DeVos actually got into a big battle with Donald Trump here in Michigan, where she was trying to support people she viewed as more electable, who were slightly less MAGA. And of course, Donald Trump was undermining her. And of course, the MAGA candidates all won the Republican primary. It's just the way it's been happening countrywide. But then you have, I totally agree with you, AA. But then you have, there's always been kind of this crazy extreme right wing element here in Michigan. I mean, you have to remember Tim McVeigh was from Michigan. You have to remember that I believe it was Howell was the kind of the northern home of the KKK. So there's always been this kind of extreme element. So it's not terribly surprising that you would see things like, say, for example, the effort to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer, those people. There are people who, there are people like that here in Michigan. Los Angeles mayoral race. I hadn't thought about covering that. Interesting race. I will add it to my notes to make sure I do something on that. That's a great idea. You see, this is where I'm enjoying doing this because, a lot of the time I'm just thinking what I think you guys are going to be interested in. The Los Angeles mayoral race is certainly something that is worth talking about. I mean, it's a race where, frankly, you could have a Republican win in a major city, which that would be kind of a scary thing, actually. Oh my gosh, Wally, wow, you are just right around the corner from me. Thanks for joining us here. Yeah, so at any rate, great idea. And again, I'm open to any suggestions you guys have about things to cover. Dark Pepsi, you'll have to forgive me right now. I probably want to do a little bit more research before I make a lot of commentary on the LA mayoral race. I had done some, yeah, exactly, Rick Caruso. Yeah, I had done some looking into it, and basically, it's kind of scary that he could win. Wendy. Okay, are you ready for the bad news here? Latest polls are that Marco Rubio is leading in the polls. Now, does that mean he's ultimately going to win? Val Demings is a great candidate. And I think that she is running a great campaign. And, people have really been coming to the table supporting her campaign, both financially and at the grassroots. So my hope is that she will outperform the polls. But as of right now, Marco Rubio is leading slightly. So, hey, GM, I'm glad you brought the donuts. So unfortunately, that is one of the races that, as of yet, has not kind of taken off. To me, that's the scariest race, actually, if we want to talk about scary races to kind of keep an eye on, is Nevada, where we have Catherine Catherine Cortez Masto, or Catherine Masto Cortez. Somebody help me out with that one. Yeah, Susan, are you in Florida? I'll tell you, as an aside here, what I have been enjoying is watching. Okay, God bless you. It's good to have some Democrats down there. Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that could be making the polling less accurate. Okay, yeah, I have a good friend who lives in Orlando, actually. So there are a lot of things that could be making the polling less accurate. And here's the thing: we don't know where it's inaccurate is the problem. Traditionally, thank you, Catherine Cortez Masto. That's a race where, because of the fact that that the Democratic strength has primarily been among better educated citizens. Essentially, if you were to divide up the country by people with a college education versus especially white people without a college education, then the people with a college education and essentially, other, I guess, traditionally oppressed groups, they would tend to be the Democratic group, the Democratic base. The Republican base is essentially white people without a college degree, and the less educated they are, the more likely they are to be Republican. So traditionally, though, midterm elections tend to have lower turnout, and so turnout is really the key. And the people who tend to turn out more frequently tend to be senior citizens and more educated people. So you would think that should kind of lend itself to an advantage to the Democrats that might not be fully measured. By the same token, though, as you say, a lot of Republicans died in the pandemic. They are still overwhelmingly the group who are affected by the pandemic because, of course, they are into this whole vaccine craziness. Yeah, exactly right, Mike. Oh, thank you very much, Horse Rider. Appreciate it. And we'll put all that contribution directly to helping to promote this channel. Thank you. Any rate, so that may impact the polling. The big secret has been, and the big issue has been, that when you have these kind of less educated groups, they tend to turn out in large numbers for Donald Trump. The question is now, are they going to turn out for the MAGA Republicans now that Donald Trump is no longer on the ballot? It's hard to say. I mean, frankly, if they don't turn out because Donald Trump isn't on the ballot, then I'd say the Democrats stand a really good chance of holding the House and the Senate. If they do turn out, it's going to be a much tougher situation. I remember the polling before 2016, when everyone's like, "Oh, Hillary's going to win by 5-6 points." Everybody remember that? Yeah. She did actually win the popular vote when you look at it nationwide, but a lot of the polling on a state by state basis was off. And we're actually seeing some of the same states where the polling was off in 2016 showing Democratic leads now, which is kind of scary. So unfortunately, there's no way. Yeah, exactly, Wendy. There's no way to know what's going to how things are going to go. But there is definitely a concern that the polling is not accurate. Is it possible it could benefit the Democrats? Certainly possible. There's definitely an argument to be made that the polling may benefit the Democrats, the polling errors, I guess you could say. At the same time, there's also an argument to be made that the polling errors might benefit the Republicans. We can say that in the last couple special elections, Democrats overperformed. that they performed better than Biden had actually in the districts where they were running. Obviously, the most obvious example of that is in Alaska with Mary Peltolta. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, where she won. Now you have to remember though, there are a couple of unique situations going on in Alaska. Alaska has they don't have a first past the bar election system. They have an election system where essentially what they'll do is if nobody gets a majority, they will then essentially drop out the person who got the least votes and then take the votes that person's supporters said were their second choice and give them to that candidate. And as it turns out, Petolta, again, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, she won most of the second place votes. And so that's the first thing. The second thing that's kind of informative, though, about Alaska, which may be more generally applicable in this election, is of course you had, it was a surprise, really good surprise, is of course you had Sarah Palin running. And she is a classic example of the MAGA unpopular candidate who's going to drive away support. Yeah, you're exactly right, Susan. She did not like that. And so my hope is that that's what we're going to see in places like Arizona, where you've got somebody help me out here. The guy who's running as a Republican against Mark Kelly, who's, he's yes, exactly, ranked voting, exactly right. Chicken McFry. Yeah, he kind of looks that way. But anyway, so he's the kind of candidate who hopefully will turn people off. Same thing as we've seen with Dr. Oz in Pennsylvania, which again, I don't want to dismiss the value of Fetterman, who is just fantastic. But also in Georgia, where you've got all the craziness going on down there. And hopefully we're going to see some people who are getting tired of Rubio, who are getting tired of DeSantis, hopefully who are getting tired of Abbott in Texas. Oh yes, I think somebody asked about Abbott in Texas. Yeah, I know, Wendy, it can be a challenge sometimes. Let's see here. Can I do something? Blake Masters, thank you, Horse Rider. Man, you are on it today. Let me try to block this person here. Let's see if I can do that. There we go. Okay, is that better? All right, so Blake Masters, exactly right. Yeah, again, somebody who's going to be turning people off. And then we have in Ohio, we've got oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm blanking out on his name. Again, you guys will have to forgive me. I'm terrible with names. I'll tell you, actually, at the beginning of every semester, I need to tell my students, know that I am terrible with names. So, so you'll have to forgive me. So you'll have to be aware that JD Vance, exactly right. Thank you. Trolls boost the you're right about that, actually. I'm not upset when I see them commenting or even giving me thumbs down. It doesn't bother me, because all YouTube cares about is if people are paying attention, and obviously they're paying attention. You're right about that. But anyway, so yeah, JD Vance, I mean, another very unattractive candidate, who as a result, we actually, it's a close race there. Do I think that we're going to win? Frankly, it would be a miracle if we won in Ohio, but it's possible, because again, JD Vance, not an attractive candidate. And thanks, Sally. And And yeah, exactly right. Thanks, Mike. Um, and Majewski, yes, yeah, exactly. Um, so so the point being that they have terrible candidates across the country. They have literally turned off the average voter. And if anything, they're kind of encouraging Democrats to get out and vote. So as a result of that, the Democrats actually, I think, stand a chance of holding on to the House and the Senate simply because of the difference in the quality of the candidates. So that's going to be interesting to see. But as I say, OPEC hurt midterms. Horse Rider, thanks for the question. I am worried about that. I am worried about that. I've got to tell you, uh, and this is kind of a controversial view, but this is how I view it. Uh, I would like to see Biden basically make advances toward Venezuela and Iran. And because deals are ready to be made with both those countries. Now, obviously, Iran is a little bit more of a difficult situation lately with the protests and all. But certainly Venezuela. Venezuela actually has a Chevron operation there, which is ready literally to be turned on like that, where they could start pumping enough oil to make up the difference that this OPEC cut is making. So if we could go down and essentially make a deal with the regime down there, doesn't mean that we have to that we need to like them. Unfortunately, the reality is we do business with bad guys all over the world sometimes. I mean, one of our top trading partners now is still China. I mean, need I say more? But if we were able to get Venezuela to start pumping some oil now, that would certainly help a lot. Um, well, Hugo Chavez isn't there anymore. So, you're right. I mean, that's right. That was one of the things. Sidney Powell. Here's an interesting thing as an aside here. I don't know if you all saw, but she has been sanctioned by the courts where she filed her frivolous complaints over the election. Courts have repeatedly said that she had no basis to make the claims that she did. And Yeah, exactly. Exactly right, AA. We did business with bin Laden when he was fighting the USSR. Exactly right. I mean, sometimes, um, there's that famous saying by Winston Churchill, which I believe that he said it, which and I'm paraphrasing here, which is essentially if Hitler invaded hell, that he'd want to do a deal with the devil. Um, and yes, I do think that that's true, Horse Rider. I think that our alliance at this point with Saudi Arabia is really tested. They forget the fact that the whole Gulf War back in the early '90s, that was all about. Yeah, exactly. Charlie Wilson's war. The Gulf War was all about Saudi Arabia. That was all about protecting Saudi Arabia. They were afraid that Iraq was going to keep going. And in fact, what originally kind of pissed off bin Laden was the fact that he had gone to the leadership in Saudi Arabia and suggested that he could put together like this jihad group that was going to protect Saudi Arabia from the Iraqis. And the Iraqis at the same time they did, yes, exactly right, AA. And the Iraqis, and I'm sorry, and the Saudis basically said no, and instead wanted the U.S. to come in and protect them. And that was especially galling to bin Laden because of the fact that he viewed us as being the infidels here in the Holy Land. You have to remember, I mean, Saudi Arabia is where Mecca and Medina are, which are essentially the key sites for the Quran. And so as a result of that, the bin Laden, part of what really outraged him against the United States and led to him kind of going on this jihad against us, which of course led to September 11th, et cetera, and so many of the other problems we've had since then, had to do with the fact that the United States went in and protected Saudi Arabia. And here we are now, still dealing with them. Now, don't get me wrong. Long term, and I've been saying this for years, long term, the solution is for us to reduce our dependence on oil. Long term, that's the solution. The Inflation Reduction Act, of course, is going to help us a lot with that. It's going to take us many steps in the right direction there, which would be wonderful. But to the extent that we're able to reduce our dependence on oil, that's really going to be the thing that ultimately makes Saudi Arabia and OPEC Plus irrelevant. And I tell you, there'll be a part of me that will really laugh when the world has kind of turned away from oil, from its dependence on oil, and Saudi Arabia and all those Arab Gulf countries are left as nothing more than just big deserts, because that's all they will be without oil, with the exception of Dubai, which that's a whole other story. Yeah, I'm with you, Wendy. So, just because of the fact that I'm saying in the short run, we need to exactly right. That in the short run, we need to kind of try to go to bad guys to help generate more oil. In the long run, the solution is clearly reducing our dependence on oil. Yeah, but if all they're left with is that, then they can sit and stew in their own juices. Let them. I don't even want to. I don't even want to predict what they'll do to each other. But yeah, I mean, Mike, there's always going to be a certain amount of fossil fuels that are required. Just because of the fact that there are certain things that we use fossil fuels for, or at least into the future. But at a minimum, we can reduce our dependence on it. I mean, as of right now, the number one country that we import oil from is Canada. And it used to be one of the major countries that we imported oil from was Venezuela. And we could certainly go back to that. And what's more is on a net basis, the United States actually produces more oil than it imports. So we are certainly in a situation where the military will use a lot of it for sure. We are in a situation where the United States is kind of able to better manage the situation than some other countries. But the big issue is just it increases the price because it's a global market. And that's going to be the type of thing that then gives kind of the Republicans an opening, which will then allow them to do things like destroy our democracy, just continue their attack on the climate. Yeah. So the long run solution is we need to reduce our usage of oil. That is absolutely the long term solution to the problem. And hopefully the Inflation Reduction Act is going to help us get there. All right. What do you guys say? One more, any other? No electric jet fighters yet. It's funny you say that though, but they are starting to work on electric transport aircraft. And I believe that they're working on alternative fuels for the for jets, things like using hydrogen rather than the jet fuel. So in the long run, there's are definitely things that can be done to address the fact that aviation is such a large user of fossil fuels. So in the long run, I'm optimistic. We just kind of need to get through these next couple of years here, see if we can keep things on the right track. Because believe me, the Republicans are sitting there trying to. Will the military turn out to vote? Well, good question. In terms of the military voting, they do tend to turn out, actually. That's not really an issue. They are overwhelmingly, they vote in pretty large numbers. And as I recall, I think that the enlisted tend to be Democratic and the officers tend to be Republican. I'm not sure about that. Yeah, exactly. Right, Mike. Okay, easy dash target. Let's start. Let's talk a little bit about Elon Musk. And I'm sure some of you, because I know that all of you have been following my channel for a little while, you know how I've been commenting on Elon Musk and the and his purchase of Twitter. and how he was going to fail in his effort to get out of that he was stuck with a contract, that that he had no options to get out. Well, now we see that those predictions were absolutely right on target. Elon Musk is basically saying uncle, trying to end the legal battle, basically admitting the fact that he has to buy Twitter for the amount of money that that they'd agreed upon. It's a bad deal. I mean, he offered way too much money. The stock of Twitter actually is way below the value that he offered, but he's stuck. He signed a contract. He's out of luck. He can't get out of it, and he waived doing any kind of extra investigation, any kind of due diligence. So he's out of luck. He's going to be stuck with it. That being said, I got to tell you, I don't know how enthusiastic I'm going to be about Twitter after Elon Musk takes control of it, because of the fact that I think we can expect to see Donald Trump back on it and more of the crazy right-wing stuff there. Yeah, Leah. No, I mean, if you're looking for consistency here, pretty hard to find. I mean, I'll tell you, one of my favorite things, and we'll just kind of finish off our live feed because I think we're coming to the end here. With this story here, I remember back when, gosh, what's his name? He was governor of Arkansas, and the father of the White House press secretary. Somebody help me out here. And Huckabee. Yeah. Mike Huckabee, when he was running for president, and it was a debate. And you have to remember, Mike Huckabee was an evangelical. Thank you very much, Horse Rider. Man, you are hot tonight. Yeah, Huckabee was he was running for president, and I remember there being a debate where he was asked, how can you essentially be a preacher who believes in life and yet favor the death penalty? Isn't this something that Jesus was opposed to? And his response, I'll never forget it because it was so contrary to everything that the Bible says, was, well, I don't want to pretend that I know everything that Jesus said. Well, I got news for him. Jesus was pretty darn clear about that. Remember the whole thing about not being the one to cast the first stone? He was pretty clear about being opposed to the death penalty. So in terms of hypocrisy here, it's endless. But I mean, look at the way also that they treat immigrants. Do you think that Jesus was in favor of treating immigrants like they're some kind of dirty people who need to be pushed out of the country? I don't think so. However you feel about religion, the thing that is striking when you pay attention to the evangelicals and the right wing is their is just how is just how hypocritical they are. Okay, Wendy, I agree with you. I think that Trump is probably not going to win again. And I think I saw somebody about who's going to win in Brazil. Oh yeah, Horse Rider, who's going to win in Brazil? I'm thinking that Lula might pull it off. Fingers crossed on that. And Mike, you are right. Not very Christian. There's no. I mean, at this point, though, the Christian evangelical movement is basically a white right-wing political movement. It's not a religious movement, spiritual movement anymore. And yes, go fund these. That's what I was saying, is I think Twitter is going to be finished because it is going to become another one of those right-wing cesspools. And I think a lot of people are just going to be driven off it. Certainly, if it becomes that, I'm going to be very hesitant to use it anymore. And Mike, you are right. I mean, it's Christian nationalism is what it is, which, by the way, is what Nazis believed in, Christian nationalism. So, hey, there you go. Well, at any rate, that is, yeah, Truth Social. Truth Social is going out of business anyway. So, he's going to need a place to go for his tweeting. So, at any rate, that's the time we had allocated for this. I got to tell you, I'm starting to lose my voice here. This has been a lot of fun, though. We will definitely do this again. I'm so happy that all of you joined up for this conversation. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Thank you, Wally. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Horse Rider. Thank you, all of you. I will be so happy to see you again. And we will chat again sometime in the future. Talk to you later. Take care.